Okay, it's time to get started. Welcome back after a couple weeks. Hopefully you remember HTML, CSS. That's the class you're taking. So I had to remember where I left off too. I couldn't remember. While you had your break last week, I put up the midterm exam. Actually, I just made it visible today. It is on bhacker.com, so you have everything you need for this course now, except for the final, obviously. And what you're looking at in front of you is the midterm exam, and it is not due until August 16th, which is the date everything else is due for all of, if you're taking another class with me, all of the due dates are August 16th, which is a Tuesday, from when I just looked at the calendar. And the final exam week-ish, week or 2 weeks, will be around that time period as well. I'm hoping going to do it the week before the 16th week, and then the 16th week, so we're done by the 20th, essentially. But I wouldn't wait till the last minute to upload your work into the EMS, because you know what happens when you do that. So the system goes down. And if you don't turn it in, you can't get credit for it. You don't get credit. And do not email assignments to me. I know you guys sitting here aren't going to do it, but the people listening to this YouTube video might be emailing assignments because they're not here right now. And so don't email assignments either. Alright, so this is the midterm exam, and what you're looking at are the instructions for it. And it is worth 25% of your grade. I didn't put it in here, but you can see that in the syllabus, if you look up the syllabus. And it's kind of an interesting assignment. Don't ask questions about it, essentially. Part of the assignment is for you to interpret the instructions. So note that I'm giving you a lot of details here, because I'm not interested in testing your ability to memorize. I'm interested to see if you can test your ability to use HTML and CSS and to apply concepts such as nesting, elements, attributes, properties, values, write them using the proper syntax. So I'm going to give you the verbiage down here, and you're going to put it in, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You're going to figure that out for yourself, how to nest it, how to do it. So if you ask me questions about it, I'm not going to answer them, essentially, because that's the purpose of the assignment, is to see if someone gave you these instructions, could you do it? As an example, what you're doing is you're putting together an HTML page using CSS. So you're using the concepts that we're going over. No JavaScript on this, by the way, just CSS and HTML. So you want to include the following doc type, and people are going to go, what's the doc type? Well, go look it up. So that the page will be validated, or will validate. What's validation? Go look it up. Be sure that all of your tags are properly nested. What do you mean by that? Go look it up. And here's the doc type that I want you to use. And then you have to figure out where to put it. So I'm looking to see that you've put it in the right section of the HTML document, that you've got, you understand what it's used for, kind of thing. And then also, different things. Number B, be sure to use be sure that your page has the following elements to it, all nested properly: body, head, HTML style, title. And so, obviously title goes in the head section. So you have to kind of put the pieces together from the information that you're given. The website, it doesn't have to contain anything. It could be a blank page. You're just assembling these tags, and you're putting the elements in that are requested. Anything extra that you want to add is up to you. The site doesn't have to have a theme. It doesn't have to have images. It doesn't have to do anything. It just has to, basically you want to follow the formatting. And one of the elements required, let's say for example, requires that the attribute type with the type CSS, text CSS. Don't forget to add that in terms of what you're putting up here. Putting all the text into the body element, and then what's all the text? We'll make it up. You can put it doesn't have to be a fancy site. You don't have to have anything on it really. Just put some text in to show that this is in the body. In fact, you can put here, this is body text. This is text that's showing up on the header. Here's my title, stuff like that. So anyway, so I'll allow you to read through it. If you do have questions about interpreting it, I will definitely entertain them. I just won't answer questions like, what is doc type? What is CSS? What is HTML? Hopefully I won't ask those questions. But yeah, no, feel free to send me an email message, or I guess in the next couple weeks I'll bring this up again and I'll ask if there's any questions on it. But anyway, it's the midterm exam. It's about time. It's midterm in the course, so it's probably a good time to start working on it. You should be able to do it at this point with what we've covered so far. And it's not due till August 16th, along with everything else. So let's see. Yeah, use CSS to make all the second level headings red, headlines red. So the headings. So. Okay, so back to the lecture that we started last time that we're going to finish up today, and then we're going to talk about more forms. And I was told we stopped on slide 72, so let me get to that point. Covered a lot of stuff already. This lecture was going through examples of stuff that we have already covered in terms of the syntax. It was putting all the pieces together and showing it to in terms of a lot of examples. We looked at tables, looked at basic syntax for fonts and stuff. We looked at the form concept as well. So I'm going through trying to find where we left off. And today we're going to continue. In fact, we're going to start lecture 7, which is into forms in JavaScript. So you'll see how JavaScript can be used with forms as well. So let's see. We have menus and frames. Did those, I believe. Well, you covered a lot already. Let's see. Navigating. Oops. CSS. Went over and reviewed the 3 different ways you could use CSS, the cascading concept. And we got as far as here, maybe. That's what I'm told. 72. So I think where we left off. And this is basically just reiterating the point of the CSS validation service, which is at validate. w3c.org validate, but you'll find it. All you have to do is type in W3C's CSS validation. And the interesting thing is you can get CSS. This is why this slide is a bit different. Before I showed you HTML and XHTML validation. Well, it can also be used for CSS. So you can upload your CSS to this, and it'll validate the format of the CSS and tell you if any of the tags are wrong, if any of the syntax is wrong on that, or if it can validate it. And in terms of the validation, you can upload a file. You can go to a website. It will go to basic. No error or warning found on this particular one here, so apparently the CSS is okay. It doesn't really give you too much. It's just going to basically say it's good, or no, errors, 25 errors, 50 errors. And then you know there's a problem. You don't have to validate your CSS files for this class, although one of the assignments, actually probably all of the assignments, says validate your HTML page, which is not a bad idea, actually, because it kind of gets you in the habit of using the proper syntax. Because as we know, it will all work. It just may not necessarily be, may not necessarily have a closing tag for every opening tag, anything that might happen. So moving right along, we apparently we looked at image maps, I believe. We looked at mapping out regions of images for the mouse click for menuing. So you can click on, the state of California on a US map, put your location in correctly or something of that nature. In this next section, we're going to cover the concept of layering images, and this is a layered image actually, where you're putting an image on top of an image on top of an image, and you do that for special effects, or you do that for menuing. One image goes away and there's another one underneath it, depending upon the dynamic behavior of the clicks or something. In here, this example, and as I mentioned before, all of the examples come from the Deedle and Deedle text, and you can cut and paste them, and the names up in the right-hand corner tell you what to save them as, if you'd like. This is what the example is. And then you can run it, you can kind of see what happens. This one you're going to have the images in order for something to happen. But you see it's all in XHTML format as well, with the validation stuff at the top. So what we've got here, we've been able to use a position and property on the style element, allowing you to position the element, height, the width, and location on the page. And the new element that's being added here is the Z-index, if you can see it over here, where we've got the ability to change the Z location and basically make a hierarchy of them. Place one underneath the other by changing the Z instead of the XY. So code is kind of pointless to look at, but what it's creating is this effect where we've got, I think there's 3 images here, but let me just verify that. First image, second position. Oh, there's only 2. There's 2 images being overlapped here, not 3. But it's one on top of the other. So it's position text on top of the 2 images as well. This is an image, this orange one's an image, and this green one with this background is an image, and then the text is positioned yet on top of that again. Nice for creating buttons and things. special effects and graphics and stuff. So the effects of the z-index property, several images layered on top of one another. Here's another one called position 2, if you want to label it that way. When you have the relative positions placed on an element, the reference is a point on the page. So we've got the position for the page itself, and then also applied towards the, here we have, what is this? The alignment, essentially, relative to the left-hand side of the margin where it's placed. So the image can float or the image can move. And so what we can do is essentially wrap text around images. We can set the alignment, we can set a border around the image, we can set the properties to essentially put an image out on a page, and then perform something similar to like Microsoft Word, where we have wrapping of the text. So the text in red, as the shift left class applied to it, it makes it relative to the image position that we've put in here. So we've got the image position specified, and then we have over here in the CSS that we've created, we have a left shift and a right shift, or shift left, shift right, where we can move everything over. So the text is not exactly on top of the image, and I believe that, oops, let me go forward here. Here we go, here where the image is down here, and we're shifting, putting the text on the left instead of the right. We're moving the text around the image. So just to finish with the CSS here, we have a background color property, a background image, property, assigning a background to the body of the page. Kind of common to put an image on or logo on the back of the page. And then the background position property, assigning a location of the image of the page. And a bunch of other types of CSS going on here. The repeat to tile the image, or make it show up more than once rather than stretching it. And then what do we have? An attachment there too. Attachment to determine if the image moves as the user scrolls the page, or whether it's attached to the page, which kind of gives us an effect of a floating image if we want to do that. In fact, we can create some dynamic looking behavior with images and positioning. And as you click on something, then an image that's on top of it might move away so you can see what's underneath it or something. And this is just basically showing you the font format that's specified for the paragraph element. So, and then here, this is kind of like what the output's supposed to look like. Here's the text of the page, and essentially noting that there's no formatting needed to be set for the P, because we've already done it in the CSS. So we already know the color and everything of the text and the positioning of it in relationship with the image that's being set. And so the width as well, elements that are placed with the div tag, are set on their own line with a margin below and after it. So we can divide, and div stands for divide or division, or sectioning off. And you can actually do this with divs instead of tables if you wanted to. It's kind of very common to see div used in place of tables in terms of the format. And so we have the div style, the width, in terms of the width setting. The width and the height attributes being set to allow the user to indicate the percentage of width and height of the screen the element can occupy, where it's going to fit into essentially. And here it is here. Because if we set a background text, if we set the width a little bit larger than the number of characters on the line, we have a nice little border. It looks like it's left justified and right justified when it's only left justified. And this will set the overflow. If we have an overflow, we put in the scroll bars essentially. If we set overflow, in fact here's the tag for it over here, overflow, on an overflow scroll, because we've specified text that was bigger than the particular region that we wanted to display it in. So, which is kind of a cool little effect too. Hardly ever see it. You never go to a website and see scrollable text inside of a paragraph of something. Instead, people would prefer to make it more like a book or a magazine article and have the text kind of just flow and word wrap or scroll on its own without any scroll bars. Mixing images and text. So this is a pretty interesting example here where we've got text that's kind of displayed sort of like images. We've seen before that in the last example we were creating these kind of special items here by setting a background, a width, and using the div tag essentially to accomplish this. And you can take a look, cut and paste the source code, put it in, and you'll see how that's actually being done. But we can mix and match this with text, just the same way as we could put images in here too. And it would look like a magazine article, essentially. formatted correctly. So here's the text for that. It's called floating.html, and what we're doing is we're setting the float in the margin. So the float property allows you to move an element to one side of the screen, and the content is going to move around it, flow around it essentially, as the floated element. And then the margin here is going to set how much space, white space, there is around the particular image, around the item that you're floating. Give you the distance between the edge of the elements and the other elements on the page. Because you want a little distance, otherwise the text here you always see a little bit of white space in between. Otherwise the text gets right on top of the image and it doesn't look so good. So, in fact, if you don't want it, you just leave it out. Leave the margins out, or make the margins nothing, 0. And then the text will float right into the image. And here's some adding the concept of padding inside of the image itself rather than floating the text around the images. Pad the image essentially with some space around it, accomplishing a very similar thing. Giving distance between the content inside of an element and the element's border, because then we can add a border, let's say around the image, so you have a nice little black line around the image, and then the image is in the middle, but the image just doesn't stretch out to the black lines. It's like centered inside. And then you can use clear property. Can be used to interpret the flow of the text around the floating element. Clear to the right, clear to the left. So here we have the float element with 5em as the padding. So we've padded the text a little bit. So we've got a little not white space, it's background space, but it's still accomplishing the same kind of concept. If this were not padded, this word in P would be lined up with or almost right next to business, which wouldn't make any sense. Text flow and box modeling. So this is what we're really talking about in terms of the concepts. We have the margin, we have the border, which is the actual border, and then we have the padding, which is the space between the content and the border. And then the margin is the space between the border and the text, whatever might come outside of it from the external. And it really is sort of a hierarchy, kind of a layering approach. So if you make, let's say, for example, no border, but you make the padding big, you've accomplished the same thing as setting a margin. Or if you're using all three, it gives you the option to set a little padding, set a border, and then set some more padding after that. Or a margin, I should say, after that. And in terms of accomplishing that, we can put this little example together. And here's the text for it, setting all three. So the border width property is the width of the border around the element, and so we'll set border width. And then we are using predefined parameters that are in here, thick, medium, thin, which obviously you can know right now you could probably change the dimensions of if you wanted to, customize it. And then the border style is the style that's going to be used. Here we have a groove, we're going to do solid, clear, colored one, or some sort. A border color, if we set the color of it, use a thin line or a thick line or something, I would say border color is equal to red, border color is equal to blue. And then, and here's what the sample product looks like actually. Where we've got the different borders that are going around. This one's like practically null. One where it's a raised border, an indented border. It's kind of like when you see those images where you click on it and it goes in. Looks like it goes like it's almost like a button effect with the border appears to be sunken in, and then sometimes the button and it appears to be raised. You can do this yourself. You don't actually have to create a button to do this. You just put an image in here and make it look like it got clicked. And a lot of it's just special effects to mimic behavior. Give the user the feeling of that something behavior has occurred, like clicking a button or something. And then here we have the div style here, just specifying the border directly through the style attribute of the div element, using a style attribute instead of doing it right there at the element, right there at the tag. There's the program output where we've got, here's the sunken in one, here's the raised border, here's the sunken in, and then the different levels of medium, thick, thin lines that occur. Not too, they look like buttons actually, but they're just lines. There's no button tag being used. User absolute, so you can do, let's say an author, that's defined a style sheet. Sheets are defined within the page itself, and this should give you a hint on the particular midterm. If you came in here earlier when you were at the beginning and I showed you one of the questions, this is actually what it's getting at in terms of the style tag with the text. and what the parameter should be for that. But half the people are probably going to miss it because they're going to read the question and not actually understand the question. You go, what are they talking about? What should mean by that? So by using absolute measurement here, like 9 points as an example, or points in this particular case, the developer can override user-defined style tags. So. And it's basically showing you how if you're using a style sheet and that's external, right here inside and internal, the header, we're going to change the style to override it. And here's our program output. The developer-defined class applies to the paragraph element. It's decreased by size. So I think the font was changed to 9 point. Actually, in that example, it's probably 12 above. So the style sheet has a higher precedence of the style over the user sheet. So once the style sheet gets used, and then the user can override it. So can override the essential style. So user-defined sheets are usually external, as we've seen. User-defined style sheet is not linked to a page. They're set to the browser options. Actually, your browser has a style sheet associated with it. That's the highest element. And then a sheet defined, and then one inside of it, and then one inline. So just think about the hierarchy of where you're putting it. The closer it is to the text, the more relevant it's going to be. So it's, when I say precedence, it's more like where is it going to be overridden. Well, the closer to the text is going to override it, and then you can work backwards. If you don't use a sheet at all, it goes all the way back up to the browser setting. And then if you use a style sheet, we'll use that. And inside, it'll start using that and override. And it doesn't necessarily override. What it does is it complements / modifies whatever tags are being changed. So, and for those of you who have never seen it before, I believe this option is still there. This is a Windows Internet Explorer preference sheet, where the settings of the user style sheet in Internet Explorer, and I think the option is under accessibility. So if you bring up, I don't actually have Windows Explorer on this Mac, but if you bring up a Windows PC, and you click on Internet Options, I believe, from, I'm not sure what submenu it's on these days, and go to accessibility, down here where it says Format Document using my style sheet, you can take, and let's say you've got a style sheet, for example, for your company, and you're using it on your company's website, you can save that on your local hard drive and add it to your web browser. And you can also pull it from an internet location. So you can specify the URL or specify the file that's stored locally, and it'll apply that style sheet to everything you look at. So it may or may not necessarily look good, but it's going to override anything that is not specifically specified. Which is why some people like to put it on the style, on a file that's basically being used at the page level, because then it's going to essentially override everything at the browser level. Otherwise, users are going to be looking at everything in the wrong colors, wrong font, stuff like that. So, you can, however, set preferences on the browser to increase the font, but the particular styles might actually change given the implementation on the websites that you're going to. So here's a user style sheet, web pages with the user style sheet is applied to it. So see, user absolute.html is being brought up with this. So using a relative instead of an absolute value. Absolute value is set 9 point, 12 point in terms of the font size. Here we got font size 0.75 EM. Our rendering font size display will be 75% times the value of the font size displayed by the user style sheet. So we could say, use whatever the user is doing, but make it bigger or make it smaller, which is relative versus an absolute change for user preference. And then by using the EM in this particular case, you're not going to override the user's default style format, rather you're just going to make it a percentage bigger or smaller to emphasize something. So you can kind of work with both, essentially. Work with the user's style and just change it, make it bigger or smaller. So. And here's the output before the relative measurement is used to define the font. And then we have the font redefined. It's 0.75, so it's slightly smaller. 75% of what was there before. And this is kind of nitpicking stuff, I guess, in a lot of different ways, but it's everything you ever wanted to know about changing attribute styles. So user style sheets themselves using the relative measurements and an author styles. So the output is relative to the measure measurement that is being used relative to the measurement of the user defines are not overridden. So kind of gives you, well, everything you ever wanted to know by example in terms of some of the concepts that we've looked at so far. Now what I want to kind of move into, and what we're getting to eventually, is the concept of JavaScript. So this is kind of our first exposure to it. And now what I want to do is show you why it's used, essentially. And then we're going to get into it. And then next week will all be all about JavaScript. Because I'm really not quite sure much more about HTML and CSS I could show you. I mean, I've shown you a bunch of tags. We've sort of looked at the tags in terms of samples. And I've shown you some CSS stuff. We've looked at different styling ways of absolute and relative style formats for CSS. And creating style sheets and how the style sheets are being used. Images, image maps, all that stuff is essentially just a handful of the HTML attributes, HTML styling. The only way you really learn HTML is to put it to use, which is why the assignments are important for you to do, because it gives you practice. So beyond HTML, which is completely static, as you know so far, there's often a need to have dynamic behavior. There's a form that you fill out for a shopping cart, or there's a a to-do list, or there's a get on the mailing list or something. And we've seen actually how to send out emails and stuff as well, how to go to different links, which just makes it sort of dynamic. But in terms of event-driven programs in HTML, the forms are essentially your option. So we're looking at event-driven programs in terms of the onload, unload, things that happen with button presses, HTML forms and attributes, buttons, text boxes, text areas, stuff we've seen already, but now it's going to be in relationship to how to put it on a form. And we've actually already seen these elements. We saw them in the last lecture, the radio buttons, the check boxes and stuff, but we'll see some further examples. And then JavaScript. And this will be pretty easy stuff. This is not a JavaScript programming course, by the way, so you don't have to worry about learning a lot about JavaScript. In fact, if you can get it working, 50% of the functionality working in the assignments and stuff, you've accomplished a lot for the type of course that this is. But we're going to show you some built-in functions, the OnClick, the alert box, the OnChange, all these kind of things that are built-in functionality that's pretty handy to use. And then some advanced techniques and features, windows, frames, timeouts, cookies. Take a look at the concept of cookies. Some of this stuff you're not going to be able to do because obviously every web browser out there deletes cookies automatically now. So saving information in a cookie is kind of pointless. And then the concept of frames. No, frames aren't really the desirable way of dividing out a web page these days anymore. Some browsers refuse to even support them anymore. So in terms of event-driven programs in C++, the programs are serially executed. So you guys know what event-driven is. Let me just give you a brief kind of explanation of it. Top-down, procedural. You start and you go instruction by instruction until the program ends. So main starts a function that executes sequentially from the first statement. You might loop, you might go to different sections of the code, but you proceed step by step in some sort of predetermined format. So we are doing the opposite. In HTML, we've got the user bringing up a web page. And the web page itself is going to load in kind of a serial manner. It's going to show everything out on the screen just like it would every time the web page loads. But the course of action after that's a bit different. So the user can click on buttons, they can fill out a form, they can proceed through the website in any direction that they want, which makes it truly event-driven. So the programmer may not know or may not have control over when a code, even if it will ever be executed. Sometimes some code is out there, but it's never executed, never run. So there's no set sequence. No page waits for an event to reaction. Or the page just waits for an event and then reacts to an event. So the main two things that happen in terms of events without the user's control is an onload and a non-unload. We've actually seen this already when I looked at the music, because when the web page loads up, we can set an onload that will play a song. Just like that guy's song a few minutes ago on his phone back there. So as soon as the student comes in and sits down, song gets played. That would be an onload. So simplest events when the page is loaded. And obviously when the page is unloaded, that's an on-unload. So the onload attribute is the body tag that specifies JavaScript code that is automatically executed when the page is loaded. Onload is the same thing, automatically executed when the browser leaves the page. And here we have in red, this is kind of an interesting thing, it's kind of separated in red and blue. Form number 1, you can cut and paste this. You don't have to add anything. Your web browser will automatically support JavaScript if it's up to date. You don't even have to do, this is not Java, a totally different language. You don't have to have a Java plugin, you don't have to update, you don't have to have the JVM or anything. This will run without Java. But what do we have here? We have, this is going to be interesting. This is our first scripting language, so we're using script space type instead of a CSS type or another type, style type. This is a script instead of a style, so script type is equal to text / JavaScript. So we need this in here if we're going to have JavaScript functions, and it always ends up in the head section. And then here's our 2 functions, and for programmers out there, this is very user-friendly. And even the non-programmers can kind of figure this out a little bit. The function here is going to be called hello, and then we have another function called goodbye. And the first one, hello, is going to say, and this is a variable, global name is equal to, and we don't actually have to define variables, you know, variable string global name. No, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to declare or initialize or do anything with variables. We just use them. So it's not as strong as, it's not as picky as a full-fledged programming language, and it really isn't as a scripting language. Here we have prompt. The prompt's going to put up a little input box. So the input box comes on the screen, and you know, gives you a spot to type in. So you can actually kind of take and cut and paste this and see what happens. So when you go on to this page, a little input field is going to come up and say, it's going to say, welcome to my page, what is your name? And then it's going to take and it's automatically the input box upon closing the prompt box, or input box, prompt, excuse me, dialog box. It's going to take what's in there and add it to this particular variable, global name, which is why we have global name is equal to prompt. So get whatever the prompt, when this is, you don't have to do anything but say prompt. It's the type of dialog box that shows up. Enter in your name. And then goodbye is going to be alert, so long, and then put the name in here. So long name, come back again soon. So on the unload, right before the page actually goes away, the little window comes up and says, so long, bye. Only problem is alert boxes, prompt boxes, all this stuff violates security these days. In the old days, people did this all the time. Nobody ever thought about that. And if you had a little box that came out and prompted you for some information, everybody would just close the box. Nobody would actually type anything in it. And the alerts, most of the web browsers these days automatically block them. So even if I ran this, I don't even know if it would run, seriously. So I would, unless it's an assignment for a class, I'd hesitate using an alert box, and I'd hesitate using a prompt box. However, for password fields, for in fact, some of the assignments in this class, you can use the alert box, you can use a prompt. Just know that in a real industry-wide application, this is probably not the preferred method. Instead, you're going to do something else, and we're going to see it on the form rather than a box. But it's a good thing to show you this, however, only because it kind of shows you a simplified way of how do you run methods, and how do you run, how do you run functions. JavaScript, believe it or not, is object-oriented, but we're writing 2 functions here. So we have a function space, the name of the function, opening and closing brackets, and our code is inside of the function. Here in the body of the section, on the load, we have it equal to hello, which means it's going to go run that function. And then on unload, it's going to be equal to goodbye. So it's going to come up here, and it's going to run hello and goodbye. And then whatever text appears on the page is going to show up. So this is in the body, and the functions themselves are defined in the head. We can do the same thing that we do with CSS. We can put this in a .js file or a .myjs or call it whatever we want. Stick it outside, load it up in the head, load the file, just like the CSS file. Believe it or not, it's very similar syntax. And then we have all those functions available to us. We just use them inside the body. So let's talk about forms. Forms and JavaScript go nice together because it's great to be able to fill out a form with text boxes and stuff, but we need to get the information, we need to do something with it. And JavaScript's really good for form checking, for validation checking to make sure all the fields were entered incorrectly. There's a number where there's a number supposed to be, there's text where the text is. So in terms of the form, most of the event-driven behavior of JavaScript is associated with form elements. So the form is a collection of elements for handling input, output, and events. So we have form, we have a tag that for form, and the name is going to be equal to form name. And we're going to have a closing tag for the form at the end. So we define everything inside of the elements is inside of the form. So if we have an event for submit or reset, it's per the form. And so everything is kind of globally set for that. Form elements include for input, let's say a button, a selection list, a radio button. We've seen all these items already, actually. And then for output, a text box, a text area. Probably a lot better than an alert box. And we'll visit forms also when we consider CGI programming. Towards the end of the course, I'll show you how HTML stuff can be used with other scripting languages. You won't be responsible for programming in them, but at least you'll get an idea how it's used with CGI, which is used a lot with, actually. So let's look at the button element. The simplest form element is the button, and the button is going to be submit, obviously. So the simplest form, analogous with the real-world button, so you can click on it to trigger an event. So here we have the input type, and the type is going to be equal to a button, and we have all the button characteristics that are associated with it. Attributes might also include, at a minimum, they usually include the value and then the OnClick event. So the value is going to specify the label that appears on the button. So it's going to say submit. No, that would be too easy. No, I don't know. A lot of people use the word submit. Now people are used to okay, submit. Sometimes people like go, enter, save, I don't know, which are other words for submit. And then the OnClick specifies the code that's going to execute. So for every button, are you going to write the code all over again? Nah, you're going to include a bunch of JavaScript functions, hopefully. Or you're going to include something in a non-JavaScript, maybe a different language. But JavaScript, and let me tell you, for those people who have never taken a web programming course before, have no idea what JavaScript is compared to other ones, it's a client-side scripting language. So if you're going to use it on a form, you got to use a client-side scripting language because the form is on the client. The activity that's occurring, the event is on the client. You can't have the form go to the server, find the functionality, and then go run it back on the client. If you're going to do that, you're going to use a total client application, and you're not going to create a form. Or you're going to take the form, submit, using JavaScript, out to another form that's going to process it on the server to run it through a server-side script. So, although server-side scripting is great, and it's very secure, and it solves a lot of problems in modern day, database connectivity and security and proprietary information, there still becomes a need to do client-side scripting. Because, how are you going to check the form values and make sure it's all complete? How are you going to put an action on a button? So you actually kind of still need to do some JavaScript. And you'll find JavaScript mixed in with practically every program out there. It's supported by every browser. It's great for form checking. It's great for forms. And I think one of these examples is a form checker, actually. So here's our form number 2, our second form in the series here. We're going to have fun with buttons. And inside we have a button form. So it's called, the name of the form is called button form. And we have an input type, we have a button. The value is going to be click me. And then on the click, the OnClick event, it's going to send up an alert box. It says, thanks, I needed that. So when you click on the button, a little message comes up that says, thanks, I needed that. Anyway, it's kind of cute. You can cut and paste it, put it in your web browser. It's kind of simple to the form. You can probably figure this out without seeing it live. Well, what if we don't want to put an alert button up there, but we want to run a function on the OnClick, which is a little bit more common, actually. Because remember what I just said about alert boxes are not so good in today's internet security features. So the OnClick event can specify a JavaScript code. Normally it specifies a function. It doesn't have to. You can actually put the JavaScript code on the on the OnClick event. So you can sequence a number of statements inside of quotes, or you can call a function. More common to see it call a function. It makes the code more readable, for the same reason why we are taught to use functions. So here we have a JavaScript, and this is an example of loading in a random.js file. Right off of this is for textbook examples again. So we have a script type, and it's going to be equal to JavaScript, text JavaScript, and the source is going to be equal to, if it was in the local directory, we could just say random.js, but it's not, so we have to specify the URL for that. And then down here on the bottom, we're going to use random int. So on the form, it's going to say click for a lucky number. So you click the the button. It says click for lucky number. And then on the click, and what we've done here is kind of purposely did both. Did the code, put some code in here, ran a function, and put it up an alert box. Kind of show you how it works. And this is all within quotation marks, because this is the code that's being run. So numbers equal to random integer 1, something between 1 and 100. And we have semicolon at the end of the line. And this could be on 3 different lines, could be on the same line, it doesn't really matter. And then we're going to set up an alert box. The lucky number for the day is, and then print the number, essentially. So it's kind of, it's running a function, it's running random int. Random int is coming from random.js, which is defined in random.js. This is more on the lines of what you normally see happening. Because no one's going to include the function in this HTML page. Because once you include the function in the HTML page, it's in that HTML page. If you put it into an external file, kind of like the CSS concept, you put it into an external file, you put it on the website, you upload it to the server, everybody can use it. So it's more shareable. And if you have like something that says, I don't know, just average calculations for you or interest rates or something, you don't want to keep redoing that all over again. Just put it in a JS file and call the function. Call the functions after you've loaded the file. So buttons and functions for complex tasks. You should define the functions and have the OnClick button trigger the function. So here we have form number 4, same as before. Here's a function greeting, and this is complex because it's going to get this certain day. It's going to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I know everybody wants to do this, I know. And it's also going to use an alert box, I believe, as well. And so here we have variable now is going to be equal to new date. It's going to say get us the date. If now.getHours is less than 12, then we're going to set up an alert box. This says good morning. And then if it's smaller than 18, good afternoon. Otherwise, it's the larger than 18. It must be the evening. So good evening. So then on the button form itself, we're going to have a button that says click for greeting, and on the click is going to call the function greeting. This is the kind of better way to do it. It's a little clean. Put everything in the function. So we don't have to get the system today, figure out what it is, then go over here to run a text, to run an alert box. So just call the function greeting, essentially. So buttons in Windows. So alert boxes are fine for displaying short, infrequent messages. Not well suited for displaying longer formatted text. Who wants to read a little alert box? And not integrated into the page. Requires the user to explicitly close the box. Sometimes the box shows up and it's underneath the web page or something. The user doesn't see it. And then they can't click on anything till the box goes away, or the box stays up, or better yet, the web browser just automatically gets rid of it. Question, could we instead use a document.write? Yep, we could. Because we're looking at an object-oriented world and the document's the main object. We can say document.write. We'll say write it on the document. So now instead of using HTML, we're using JavaScript to call the document body and write something on it, like put the result out there somewhere and put it somewhere on the document. We can put it in a text box on the document. We can put it anywhere we want. So no would overwrite the current page, including form elements. If we did a document.write, we would take the body and overwrite it. So a common approach is to open up a window and then take document.write and write it to the window. So this is a pop-up window, and again you have the same problem. Every time you open up a window, the browser is going to, your security settings are going to go, why did you open up a window? You didn't ask to open up a window. So you can open a browser window and then write it there. Here we go, variable output window is equal to new window, or excuse me, window.open. Opens up a window. And so you can do this, and this is kind of, for those people who are familiar with object orientation in any language, it's the same thing. We're running a method open on an object window that's actually inherited from the object for the browser. Output window.document open, write it to the document, close the document. Which is essentially accomplishing the same task as sending up an alert box. But you can get a window of any size. You can make the window the same size as the current window. Automatically, actually. You can make this window smaller, and it doesn't look like an alert box. It looks like a window. Or you can put something in the window, and then, a few minutes later, go to another web page or something, or close the window automatically. So there's a lot of things you can do with it if the user security settings will allow it, that is. So here's number 5 example. We have a function help, very common feature of help systems actually. You click on something and another window pops up, and inside the window is your help information. So variable output window is going to be equal to window.open, and we're going to open from document from output window, which is an output window. And output window.document.write, this may be the context of some sort of a help screen. So we're going to write some text to that particular screen, then we're going to close it, essentially. And then over here on the bottom it says, click for help. And then you click, and it runs the help function. And the help function opens up this window and puts the text in the window. So it's kind of a nice way of creating your own context-sensitive help in some ways. You press on it and it opens up a window, and Window's got help for it. So here's a window example that could be redefined. So you can have arguments for the window.open. First argument is going to be the href. Maybe put it, instead of writing all this text inside of a JavaScript function, inside of a page, or even inside of a file, just create a website. Then all the websites have one page for each one of the different help messages. Open up the window, load the help message that is associated with the particular control that the user clicked on. So you can kind of dynamically already set the help messages, have somebody else maintain the help messages and all that information, and then just show the proper one in the window. The second argument is going to be the internal name of the window, so you can call the window, close the window, move the window, and also specifying the properties such as the size, the height, and width of the window. So here we have the output window is equal to window.open, and then we have the status 0, menu bar 0, which means don't show us the status bar. Don't show us the browser menu bar at the top, which makes it more of a solid window, no controls on it. Height 20, width 20. Kind of looks like a document. It looks like an alert box. Maybe a bigger alert box, 200 by 200. And then we're going to open it, and then we're going to write to it the context-sensitive help that might be written to it. Same example as before. Down here on the OnClick, it's going to run the help. Help function is going to essentially open up the window and load the text inside of it. So let's take, in fact, that is really all you can do with a button. The OnClick event for a button is going to run a function, or it's going to do something manually. But that's pretty much all the options that you have. In terms of another form menu item is usually a text box that appears on the form. Text box allows you for user input. And so unlike the prompt, which sends up a window, user inputs on the same page. So it can be edited, can be moved around. So input text is equal to text. The attribute is going to be the name of the contents. So it's kind of like a variable that you're going to call the contents that appears in this text box. So you give it a name. That way you can use the name, send the name to another browser location, send it to another location on the internet, save it, copy it, use it as a variable. And then the size is going to be the number of characters that are going to be in the text box, and then the value, initial contents of the box when it loads up. So here's an example of a name of the form. It's called box form, and it's going to say enter your name here. That's a label, but it's not really a label. It's just text that's going to be showing on the screen, which the purpose of it is a label by theory. Input, and you can actually create labels though, instead of just making them text. Input type is going to be text. The name is going to be username, and the size is 12, and the value is going to be 0, which means there's nothing that's going to show up in the box. And then we're going to have a line break, and then we're going to have a button. The button's going to be click me written on the button, and there's going to be an alert box that takes the document.boxform.username.value. So now we've taken it in the form of a text box. We've called it username. It's on form box form. So this kind of gives you another example of the object-oriented nature of this JavaScript kind of. The document.boxform.username.value is really getting at whatever the user enters in on that screen, and then put that on the screen essentially in terms of what the alert box is doing. It's going to show it to the user. And just as a side note, this works with everything. Text boxes, input fields of all sorts, check boxes, you can get the value essentially of any object from any document that's on any form, as long as you specify a name. If you don't specify a name of the object, you can't refer to it this way, obviously. And if you're using one form for the entire page, good luck there too. I mean, it doesn't allow you to kind of organize anything. You know, it might be there's two usernames. Maybe there's two addresses. There's shipping address and there's a billing address. Which one do you want to keep them separate? Put them on two different forms. Put both forms on the same page. So, or put them all together but use different names like shipping address and billing address. Or do what everybody else says, address 1, address 2. You have to wonder, well, what's address 1? What's address 2? And if you've ever wondered how some of these shopping carts mess up, oh, you sent it to my billing address. I wanted it sent to my shipping address. The form used the wrong one. Oh, everyone who ordered something during that month before they fixed the form, that got sent to the billing address. Happens all the time. Read and write text boxes. So you can access text box contents by doing what we did before, document.formName.boxName.value. Similarly, you can change the contents with an assignment. So you can have a button, when you fill out the form, it says put in your billing address. And then down below it says shipping address. So you really want the user to do it twice. Instead, there's a little button that says same. Click the button. Oh, all of a sudden the form gets populated. Well, this is the code that's doing it. So instead of reading it, it's writing it. So we have the box form, enter number here, and this is actually going to put it out on document.boxform.number.value is going to equal to parse it and times it by 2. It's going to double it, whatever. It's going to do something. It's going to double the number. So you enter in a number, you press the button, and then 2 becomes a 4, essentially. But anyway, document by saying that the OnClick document.boxform.number.value equals. So instead of using the value, you're just saying .value equals something else. As soon as you change the value, it gets populated automatically on the form, because it's going to be dynamically performed. You don't have to refresh the form. You don't have to reload anything. It just automatically changes for you. So we have some text box events, which is kind of interesting. We have an on-change and an on-focus. And on the change is triggered when the contents of the box are changed. So when you put something in a box, it can read the box as you're typing it into the box. And then as you're typing it in, this is kind of interesting thing. You know how like some stuff that's gray all of a sudden becomes selectable, changes in color, goes to black. When you all of a sudden okay, fill the form out, and you put your name in. Oh wow, look at that! The address is now available. Okay, and then stuff becomes available as you start filling the form out. And you say no to something, and all of a sudden stuff goes away. Nope, don't have to fill that out anymore. And it kind of makes your forms a little bit more user friendly to do an on change. And the other one is on focus. When the mouse clicks in the box, you can change the focus, and then blur actually removes the focus. So this is the most irritating thing. We have a form. It says press here, click here to win $2 million, and every time the user does the on focus to go into it blurs, takes it away, so you can't ever click on the box. Or you ever seen those images that move all over the screen and the mouse follows it? As soon as it goes on focus, the image moves. So it won't let you be on focus. It won't let you click on the item. Or even have the mouse hovered over it. The image will just move away. It's like, click here, and then you're following it around. Or maybe they don't do that anymore. It's evil jokes. So here's form number 9, example number 9, where we've got Fahrenheit to Celsius. Interesting. Or it's going to take a temperature in Fahrenheit. It's going to give us Celsius. And we're going to return a calculation that's being performed. So on the change, the document.form.celsius.value is going to be equal to Fahrenheit to Celsius. It's going to run the function, send it the parameters are going to be the value that we entered in, and then the number is going to change. So if you type it in, it's going to, or if you hover over, it's going to give you it in Fahrenheit, or it's going to give you it in on the change. It's going to automatically do it for you. And then on the focus, or actually it's like kind of like Visual Basic where it says on focus and then out of focus. Like when you click in and you click out, you can actually change the and on a focus you can do it. So So I was talking about validation, form checking, kind of text box validation is really a form of this as well. What if the user enters a non-number for the Fahrenheit box? So the solution might be to have the box validate its own contents. So you start with a legal value, and then on a change, verify that the value is legal. Otherwise, reset it. So if you've got a 0 in there originally, on the change, the person puts an alpha character, a character instead of a number. It'll change it back to 0 for you automatically. So it won't allow any bad numbers to be in there. This happens actually when you put in special characters. It happens all the time. It says put in your telephone number. You start putting in brackets or lines or something, and then it goes away. Wait a minute, what happened? It went away. It's like, well, because there was an on-change event that occurred that moved it. And this particular example is going to use a file called verify.js, and I believe I have these examples on my website. But I have to go double check now. Library defines functions for validating checkboxes or text boxes. And the interesting thing is you can get all over the internet free validation JavaScript code. Make sure a number is a number, a text is text, a telephone number is a valid telephone number. And actually they have some pretty sophisticated libraries out there. And I call them libraries. They're just text files with JavaScript functions in them. There's actually one that checks addresses to make sure that's a legal US address. I don't know if it does it internationally, but it'll say, it'll verify the address, which is nice. Because then I'm not going to be shipping something to the wrong address, hopefully. And the U.S. Postal Service actually sort of uses something like that when you fill out their forms. And then they change the address. All of a sudden, you look at the address. That's not what I typed in. Instead, it has the extended. It has a different zip code, or it has something else fixed on it. So here's the function to verify the number, with the text box as the parameter, and a reset value as a second parameter. So you assume the text box is the text box. Reset it is optional. And the result is after the alert, if the text box does not contain a number, reset it if provided to the reset value. And then here's the function essentially. I'm not gonna bore you with the functionality of it. We're just basically testing it to see if it's a number. If it's not a number, then reset it. Or if it's not empty, reset it. So here's a particular example when it's being used. So the on change we're going to run, because we've included this verify.js file, and we're going to run the verify number, and this refers to the current element that we've got. So right next to the input type text, right after the text item, we're putting in on the next line on below on change. This is before we've finished the input. We're going to say verify this number and then run this particular function along with this parameter, this.value. And it's kind of like other programming languages where we go the super and this, kind of very similar to Java in nature. This refers to this document, this HTML document. So this.value is going to be referring to this input text value. So in terms of text areas, we've seen input fields, text boxes. Text area is just a multiple line input text area. So a text box is limited to one line with input and output. A text area can specify rows and columns. So now we have a text area name, text area, rows, number of rows, columns, number of columns. Make it, so it wraps or doesn't wrap, word wrap and stuff. So. And some initial text that might appear in a particular box. So unlike the text box, the text area has a closing tag. We've noticed over here with the text box we didn't have a closing tag. Instead, until the next input box was defined, we used the information from the here, and whatever happens until we create a new element as part of this element that we just defined. So we don't have an opening. We have an opening, but we don't have a closing tag on the input item. But here we do. The text area has an opening and a closing tag, which is kind of different than some of the other elements. So unlike it, we have the closing tag. Initial contents appear between the tags, which we have initial text that might appear. And you can actually put a whole document there if you wanted to. A wrap is going to be virtual. It specifies the text wrap is needed. And then no HTML formatting in the text area, just flat text, flat ASCII text that shows up in there. You can there's certain JavaScript libraries that allow you to put formatted HTML text in text boxes. Different element, not the text area. So here's an example of the text area where we've got document.form_area.output.value is equal to message, and this is going to be the output value. It's going to appear in this particular box. And here's our text area from the example that we should be looking at. And the name is going to be output, number of rows 20, columns 15, wrap virtual, essentially. So you can put some stuff into a particular element called output, and then output.value is going to be equal to this particular message that comes out. So you can use it actually kind of a text area, you know, put some code, write some code, you know, translate the code. So you click a button, it takes the code as input, translates it, and puts it back out on the screen, which is kind of a nice application of that. Or truncates it, or processes it, or does something with it. Here's a redefined one where we've got an on-change event where, you know, after you've put code in there and you have to click a button, well, why don't you just make it so that when you write stuff in the box, and automatically, when you press return or something, it automatically knows upon a change to process it. So you can like dynamically word spell check something for you, or dynamically convert your English to another language while you're typing it. So when you get done typing something, automatically on every change it starts modifying, instead of you having to click a button. It says, okay, do it. So, and here it is, you're using the on-change event. So it's going to verify it's an integer. So if you type a non-integer value in the form in that particular box, it's going to come back and say, hey, I have to put an integer in here. Which can be kind of irritating, especially when you're stuck on the error message. And you can't retype in the box because the error message won't let you type in there or something. Which could defeat the purpose, essentially. There are some more examples that I've got on the website that look at, and they're kind of, a couple of them are games, some of them are demos and simulations of all sorts of different natures. Showing you forms, showing you a text box with a table, showing you user selections for teams and things, so radio boxes, check boxes, buttons, lists, all sorts of different elements in here. And that's the purpose of these examples, is to kind of show you how the on-change, how the on-click, and some of the other events actually work. So in terms of JavaScript and forms, an alternative for program output from using the, and this is essentially what we've covered so far, is using an alert box, good for small messages, separate window, good for longer text, outside of the page. Text boxes and text areas we've seen so far, we can integrate it into the page. These are the options you have for providing user level output. Awkward and no formatting in a text box. Or we can use frames, can easily write a lot of stuff on the output. Integrates with full formatted kind of ability. And in terms of the JavaScript and frames, we can take here, do a frame set, make it you know, input and output. So we type into one frame, we press a button, and it goes into the other frame or something. And something happens to that text and it gets translated. And we use the source here to go about box, which loads some information on into one of the frames of the frame, one of the sections of the frame. And this is what you're doing for one of your assignments, actually. You're essentially writing from one frame to another dynamically by using events that occur. If you create a menu, let's say. So here we have another example of our help system where we have a function help, and it's going to display help message in a separate frame on the same page. So this might be nice, especially I've seen this done successfully with status indicators on the bottom of the page. I don't personally like the option of putting in a frame on the sides, like the horizontally or vertically, where it's part of the user's experience. But on the bottom, you can put like a line that goes across, and then underneath it put messages, and those could be error messages instead of alert boxes showing up. And if you print the page, they're not going to print, which is nice. And it kind of just shows up on the bottom. It says, "Hey, you already did that. I did that." Oh, or "Hey, you know, this feature's not available yet." And now you also see people putting ads on there. So it's, buy this product. It's 50% off. Click here now. So a lot of the interfaces for, let's say, free email or web accounts, stuff like that, will actually use frames, dedicate a certain part of the page. So you don't get 100% of the page because you never get access to that frame. You only get that particular piece of the web page that they're allowing you to get, which is kind of their game. You know, give you a free website, but we're going to stick stuff on it for you. Or, you know, here you can check Yahoo Mail, but we're going to stick stuff on there. I don't know if Gmail does the same thing, but stick advertisements on. I don't think Gmail does that. Actually, Yahoo used to do that a lot. It was irritating. Actually, when you check Yahoo Mail, it's very irritating. The whole HTML experience is all about advertising. And looking at stuff I don't want to look at. You know, like how many friends are online or something like that. I don't really care. Okay, so here we have a parent. Interesting. This means this document, or the parent of the document that opened the document. .output.document.open. And then write something. This may be context-sensitive help. And then close it. So this is basically showing you how you can get to different levels in the hierarchy of the windows that are being opened. So, and then this button actually happens on the form, button form, and it happens with the OnClick event. It calls help. And here's a better example of doing it, in which it's the same example as before, but we're writing it now using a table. And this is kind of an interesting thing. We're writing HTML code now. We're writing the HTML code to another page. So inside the brackets here, you can probably tell we're creating a table. Oops, right up here says table border 1, table row this, table row that. So we're putting inside of the document right inside like where we normally put text, because it's sending it to the other document anyway. It's going to print it out on the page. You could theoretically set formatted HTML like an entire page. I mean, I would personally just call the page and load the page in there. But if you wanted to, if it was less than a page, you could put the HTML code in here. So it just gives you a better example because it gives you formatted text inside of, it looks like a table that's appearing inside of. So timeouts. Timeouts are really good. They come in handy for, you know, when the user's been sitting there for a while and hasn't been clicking on something, or when you redivert them to another page and it says, click here to go to the new page. And they haven't clicked there, you can just automatically send them there after a couple of minutes. Because they've read it, they just don't want to click there or something, or they can't read, maybe. So the timeout function can be used to execute code at a later time. So you can set the timeout, and you have the JavaScript code to be executed when the timeout occurs, and then the number of milliseconds until the exception occurs, how long to wait. Here's an example. To forward a link to a moved page. So you could stick this essentially, actually you can cut and paste this and stick it on the old site. It says, hey, we've moved. We're at this URL now. Click here to go to the new site. And then put a timeout on there that just sends them there if they don't click. You do that so that you can notify them that, hey, we've moved. We're at a new site. Otherwise, if they just go to a new site, they'll just keep using the old URL until it goes away. So we have self.locate.h reference is equal to new home. And in here we're saying onload.set timeout move. We're calling this function move. That's setting the self-reference. It basically is doing a redirect, or what do you call it? An automatic forward to the new home page. Because you went to an old home or something. You showed up on the wrong page. It says this page has moved to, gives you the reference. But the timeout's going to actually run the move, and the move is going to essentially go to the new page. Load the new page in there. So. Another timeout example here where we can set a timeout, time since, and just wait. And then do a time since. And here's our function time since that we're calling down here on the onload. So on a load, this is interesting, especially when, let's say for example, you know those websites where there's taking in personal information and stuff, and people go to coffee shops and they log into a website, and then like after about 5 minutes it automatically logs you out. That's because you might leave the coffee shop, but you forgot to log off the website. So you can say, you know, at the beginning on the onload, start the timer, and then after 1,000 milliseconds or something, log them out, which is how this is accomplished. Also, how it keeps track of how long you've been on a page. So you have to meet attendance or something for some reason. You go to a website and you click in there, and it says, you've been looking at this for 5 minutes. Do you need help? Do you understand what you're reading? Or puts a limit on how long you can be listening to a file, as an example, which is a nice one actually. Limits automatically stops the file or something, stops the download after so many bytes, after so many minutes or something. So here's the time since, and here's the code to be determined, and then you do to write out, let's say, a countdown. And so this is going to do a countdown, looks like. And so down here it says unload, call the time since, and then it's going to automatically do it, and then it prints down countdown to graduation. It just keeps counting. And, on a focus, blur it. It means reset it. So, cookies and JavaScript. Now this may or may not necessarily work on your web browser. You might have to enable cookies in order to actually see this working. So recall that cookies are data files stored on the client's machine, text files. They can be accessed and modified by the server, and they can be accessed and modified by JavaScript in a page. So what ends up happening is people leave little pieces of information behind in terms of forms. Because let's say, for example, you filled out the entire form. You got it all ready, but then it asked you for your social security number and you couldn't remember what it was. And then the page timed down, everything cleared. Oh man, you go back, or no, you got logged off or something. So you log back in next time. It can repopulate the form for you if it's got all the information saved. It's not going to save it on the server, it's going to save it on your local, because the script is running on your client side. So the information will be saved there too. Potential applications, e-commerce, remembering computer names, past visits, purchases that you've made, passwords, tutorials, remembering past experiences, performances, tests, exams, games, remembering the highest score. And each web page can have its own cookie. And so you have document.cookie, which is a string. So it's a string of attribute values, attribute equals value, pairs that are separated by the semicolon. Username is B. Hecker, scores 100, expires Monday, February something or other. So you can kind of keep track of this until your web browser clears it out for you. The problem is what happened in the old days is people would write programs to read the cookie files, because there's a lot of information being stored in the cookie files. And then, obviously you can probably see the potential risk there for a security issue. Because, if you put a social security number in a cookie file, why would you do that anyway? But, I don't know. Date of birth, I don't know, critical address, telephone number, and then you got to nitpick and say, well, what is critical information? So what about my name? I don't even want my name in there. So then the extreme was well, let's just get rid of cookies, essentially. So here's cookie.js, and I'll show it to you only because it's kind of interesting to see where we've come from and why this is a security issue. But you're not going to get. They're still cookies are still enabled. They just go away. They don't stick around for very long. And the cache information, your web browser cache gets like every night or something like that. Depending upon your settings, gets deleted as well. So there's a function to get the cookie, to set the cookie, to delete the cookies. And so it's just a matter of saying document.cookie.index. It's a string. The cookie is just essentially a text file that contains a string, and reads the string and parses it out with value, key, value, key, or key value, key value. So first name is equal to this, last name is equal to this, and you can use it to populate forms, essentially, which is one of its most popular uses in the beginning. So. And then here's a cookie example where we are saying visit count, get the cookie visits. Now people would probably use a session count instead. Except for when you close the web browser, there goes your session. Cookies stay after you've closed the web browser because it permanently stores the information in a text file. So unless your browser deletes the text files, we've got history past when you've closed your browser. I can set a cookie visits to 1, set a cookie visits to visit count. So this is just basically showing you again how to load a file in a cookie.js file in the header, and then call the functions in the body and essentially run functions. And the functions are going to be essentially set inside of other functions. You can nest function calls inside of function calls. You can use multiple JS files. You can load a JS file here and define more functions that aren't in the JS file and use them as well. So I would say the use of JavaScript inside of HTML is the same level of flexibility as CSS, actually. but there's no validation checking for JavaScript. Either it works or it doesn't work. But you do get more error messages that come out. So next time we're going to talk about JavaScript in a lot more detail. That was your brief introduction to JavaScript in terms of how it's used with forms. Next time, I believe that's all we're going to talk about is JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with it, you're going to become very familiar with it. I've had a lot of people send me email messages asking, this requires us to do JavaScript. This assignment requires JavaScript. I was like, yeah, it's only the midterm. If you came in late, I posted the midterm, so you can see it. It's on bhacker.com. It should be loaded in the EMS fairly soon as well. And by the time we get done talking about the Java, you'll have the information you need in order to do the assignments on Java. Questions? And the midterm is due at the very last day of the course for those people who came in late. Nope, then we are done with what we needed to accomplish for today. So I will see you next week, because we will have class next Monday, now that we're not having any more holidays, I hope.